an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire Shadow Book 1 of Shadow and Sea. Chapters 24, 25, 26, and 27. The end of the book. I didn't realize that. I didn't notice. George sent me a chart and everything, and I didn't notice. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode and for making me a chart. I genuinely just lost track of the fact that this was like he highlighted each section of the chart according to color for which book, and it was very clearly the last one highlighted in red or whatever it was, and didn't even realize it. And when I got to the end and it just said, I was listening to the audiobook and this woman's voice was like, "You may be wondering where to go from here." And I was like, what? Oh my God, really? And thankfully turned it off before I got spoiled with a next time on, you know. These chapters were really satisfying. Guys, I know that I am probably like annoying in this respect, but I just gotta tell you how much I am on the like Meia fan wagon here. I fucking love her so much. I love how irritated she is that Shera is soulbound now. She's genuinely just like, are you fucking kidding me? I went through all of these alchemical alterations and being fused with fucking monsters, and I was genuinely enjoying being better than her at something, and then she's soulbound? Fucking really? And girl, I don't blame you. You know, like, granted, she is soulbound with something that sounds like it's a little bit scary. Not sure that's a good thing in the end or not, but I can understand why Meia's initial reaction was one of deep frustration, because we know that gardeners are, you know, warned about soulbound more than anybody other than champions, you know? So anyway, this, and it's funny because, you know, reading the intros of the last chapters, it was pretty clear to me that this was a path to her being soulbound to this blade, but it didn't seem to have occurred to Lucan or to Shera that would happen, which I'm not sure why it didn't, or if maybe Lucan didn't expect it to work so quickly, perhaps. I don't know. The little like piece of that journal that we got from some ancient, you know, experimenter or whatever, basically all they said was that the object needs to be awakened and needs to be something that means a lot to the bearer. There isn't another step to make it soulbound, like in terms of the person. The object just has to mean a lot to them. And evidently, like from the way that it was phrased, it seems like it doesn't always work either. Like, you can awaken an object that does mean something to you and carry it around, and the whole soulbound thing never quite connects at all. Or that trying to awaken some objects is, like, dangerous. And I was figuring that since Lucan was able to pull that off with this, considering that it is obviously a very dangerous weapon, that meant that the soulbind had to work. But he seems surprised at the fact that she's able to use power later. And I'm wondering how much they even know about becoming soulbound. Like, I'm assuming Lucan as a reader has more information on that than Shera would have. Or maybe just retained that information better because it's more relevant to him than it would be to her. I don't know. So anyway, all right, let's start at the beginning. Chapter 24, we're back 10 years ago. And we're in Lucan's perspective here, and this is the moments right before the Emperor stamps on the lantern and puts it out. And he already senses that some shit isn't right. He can feel this like madness like in the air. And at first it's just sort of like around him as an atmosphere. But gradually he begins to realize that it's coming from a specific source. Pouring from the Emperor of the Aurelian Empire like waves of heat from a fire. Lucan stood, mute and frozen, as the Emperor dragged the treacherous watchman to the center of the room and put him to sleep with an invested pillow. Only when the Emperor began muttering to himself, when the visions of murder and mutilated corpses whirled around his head like leaves in a high wind, did Lucan finally force his paralyzed hands into action. And he has a mask to block out the intensity of atmosphere, because as a reader, normally he has to touch things in order to get anything off of them. But it's so thick in here that he can't avoid it. And he has to protect himself beyond even just wearing his gloves, which he hasn't taken off this whole time and is still sensing everything. And I love this description. The mask had been created to his exact specifications months earlier, woven out of wool sheared from unconscious sheep, by a seamstress who thought she was weaving a sleep mask for an insomniac magister. He had invested it in his free time, rubbing it through his hands and meditating on a very simple intent: bring me peace, calm, stability. Woven of wool sheared from unconscious sheep. I don't know why that is so funny. I'm just picturing, like, I'm sure that it's meant to be that the sheep are, like, asleep, or maybe they've been drugged, but I'm just picturing somebody, like, knocking a sheep over the head with a club and then shearing it, and the sheep waking up later like, what? What the fuck? Many readers had been driven mad by their powers, and he didn't intend to be one of them. He pulled the mask down over his head. The visions vanished, the gibbering whispers of insanity silenced. His fear died away, leaving only peaceful focus. He wouldn't be able to read a thing through this mask, but he needed his senses closed, not open. Lucan had the feeling the Emperor was no longer on their side. When a white armored boot crashed down on the lantern and doused the room in darkness, Lucan was ready. He drew his shears and confronted his Emperor not as a reader, but as a gardener. Meanwhile, Meia, bless her, is not coping with this so well. Lucan can sense so much that there's no question for him. He knows without a doubt what's happening. Meia doesn't have that kind of talent. And she doesn't have the critical thinking that Shera has. Because we saw in the last chapters that Shera was already like, I don't like it. Something about this ain't right. I don't get it, but I don't like it. And Meia is so unquestioningly loyal that even at one point when the Emperor is like, well, I'm going to kill you, her instinctual reaction is, I mean, he's the Emperor. Who am I to stop him from killing me? Bitch, what? Meia, get a hold of yourself. Jesus Christ. And there's a really beautiful moment where the Emperor even says to Shera at one point, hasn't it ever occurred to you that Lucan was sort of a weird choice for the gardeners? He's got too much empathy and he questions everything. That's not actually what you want in an assassin. But he's here anyway, so didn't you think that was sort of weird at the time? And you know what? I'll be perfectly honest. Never occurred to me. I just thought that he was such a good reader that would make him like extra suited to this work, because I was still sort of giving credit to the training where they like all climb that tower, and it seems like he's able to do that shit no problem. Like, I know that he cheated. He says that he cheated, that he didn't actually succeed in the mission. And when I heard that, it should have occurred to me to go, he doesn't seem that committed to this job. Why did they choose him? They seem to have good judgment otherwise. But it didn't even enter my head to ask, which just, that's not great. I feel like I should have wondered. But it turns out it's because the Emperor wanted somebody who was going to be prepared to do what needed doing and to sense what could go wrong. But we'll get there. So when the Guild of Alchemists received an assignment, they set about making a masterpiece. A formula derived from the shade shifters of the Heartland swamps gave her the ability to temporarily restructure her nails and bones. A potion of deep strider blood healed her wounds. Regular doses of nightworm venom kept her immune to the majority of poisons, and a dozen other treatments that strengthened her in ways she didn't understand. She understood the pain. The worst of the treatments had ended, and Meia had been thankful more than once for their effects, but now those advantages worked against her. All the Chimera whose power rested inside her begged her to run. Meia didn't want to run. She wanted to stand and fight beside her Emperor. The Chimera didn't see an Emperor. They saw a predator. When the light went out, Meia and her heightened reflexes stayed frozen, locked in an internal battle. And he goes for her right away, which I have to think is because he senses her as the least likely to resist. I think he knows she is so obliging and loyal that she'll be the weak link out of the three of them. I do think it's interesting. I don't really have a great mental image of where everybody is standing in this space. So I don't know if he is vulnerable from the back when he is coming at her, but I imagine Shera coming up behind him, and I was like, you know what? He is so powerful and aware at all times. It doesn't matter, he'll be able to stop her. The Emperor's eyes were fevered, his scalp slick with sweat, but he did not slow. He pulled a blade back, and a white sun exploded in the room, driving a spear through each of Meia's dark-adjusted eyes. And then she realizes that Shera threw a flare, because Meia thinks for a second that maybe that's a power of the Emperor's coming at her. Creatures of bone and pale flesh that had been invisible in the shadows hissed and slithered back into the tunnels from which they had come. So good thinking on Shera's part. I don't know if they all have flares and it's only Shera that thought to use one, or if Shera was able to sense that something else was advantageous to him about the dark and it was best to just put an end to that altogether. But yeah, Lucan is here. And he starts to get up in the mix to assist Meia. We never abandon our brothers and sisters, her mother Yala said, and then we obey the Emperor without question. If the Emperor wanted them dead, who was she to argue? And now it becomes really clear why the Emperor reacted to Shera's being able to resist his command the way that he did. And I think that, I have mentioned before how much I respect the Emperor as a ruler, that it seemed like he really had his people's best interest at heart. And the fact that he recognized he needed someone who was able to not automatically obey, that is pretty huge in terms of the awareness of his own fallibility. And obviously in this sense, the fallibility is a very literal, I could be possessed by thing. But I think that's important to all of us if we are ever in leadership positions, to enlist somebody to help that isn't afraid to call us out and be like, I'm sorry, that's a dumb fucking idea. What? No, don't do that. You're ruining it. Because we can really get so caught up in our own viewpoint. And it's astonishing sometimes, guys, when you look back at different decisions you made or different decisions you almost made, how convinced at the time you were that you were about to do a smart thing. And looking back, you are like, oh my God, thank God I didn't do that. Or thank God I tried and it didn't work out for whatever reason. We just don't know everything. But in the middle of it, it sure fucking feels like we do, you know? And having somebody around like Shera who can actively resist like the involuntary actions, which is, it's wild to me. I am dying to know why that's something that she can do. I have to assume that it has something to do with the part that's missing in her, as she puts it. But I don't know. I really respect that he was like, yeah, I'm going to need somebody who's not hyper loyal to a fault, because they are going to need to be able to turn on me if it's necessary. Let's see. So finally, she snaps out of her hesitation. She bunched strength in her legs and leaped across the chamber, her shears in each hand, driving them down toward the Emperor's collar. He slipped aside, and her knives bit only air. His foot met her forehead, and she tumbled back, head and heels in a jumble, landing up in a pile against the wall. Can I tell you guys what? He goes on and he breaks Lucan's leg. And that, combined with him just tossing Meia, that really fucked me up. You know, we've just gotten to such a point with these characters where we understand how badass they are. And it's really apparent with all of the different foes they've been up against how completely and utterly outclassed most people are by them. And even up against a champion, which is supposed to be no question they're going to crush you, Meia was able to hold her own, at least for a long time, until Shera stepped in, which is more than anybody probably would have expected. For him to just dismissively chuck her, essentially, I was like, that's... what? No. So, this is when Shera joins the fight, and we have this moment in Meia's mind that ties in later with her, you know, her reaction to Shera being soulbound. For the 1,000th time in the past 5 years, Meia watched from her back while Shera did what she could not. A steady stream of silver flowed from Shera, spades and needles and hidden daggers flashing through the air. The Emperor batted most of them aside, but each time he did, Shera was there to deliver a strike with her bronze blade. If he met that attack, she would move out of the way, flowing through a shadow like a shark through the depths. From every angle, with every weapon at her disposal, Shera kept up a furious attack. Most of them failed to land, but some succeeded. A nick appeared high on the Emperor's cheek, and on the backs of both knees, and at each joint in his armor. Meia couldn't understand it. Shera was slower and weaker and less experienced than her opponent, but somehow she stayed unharmed, while the Emperor picked up a collection of injuries that would slowly cripple even him. Without looking, Shera hopped backwards over the still sleeping form of the watchman. As she turned her head, eyes tracking her opponent, Meia finally got a clear look at her expression. It was absolutely blank, like an anatomical sketch of a human girl instead of an actual person. Her eyes were as dead as a snake's, and she scarcely seemed to breathe. The Emperor, in the grip of madness, looked more human than she did at that moment. All right, look. Remind me, guys, is her name Ashana? Ashaya? Alaya? Alaya? The one whose parents were like chimera altered and then mated and had a really fucked up child. Is one of Shera's parents a fucking like elder or something? Because something's going on, man, right? Like, I have to assume that's part of why she connects so well with the blade that killed an elder. She's got something in her bloodline. I don't know. But something's up. I'm just saying. A sense of despair settled into Meia's belly like a chip of ice. How am I supposed to compete with that? I'm only human. But she wasn't. Not anymore. She gathered her strength, the power that a team of skilled alchemists had given her as a gift, and prepared to show Shera how a real killer took its prey. And then all of a sudden, fucking Meia's finally got it together. She's like, all right, let's fucking do this. And then Shera stops and is like, yo, what the fuck is going on? Are you going to tell me or are you just going to kill me? Like, either way, just do it because I'm sick of this shit. And Meia is like, wait, what? What's happening? I thought we were fighting. Why is this? And the Emperor stops and says, which truth would you like? And she replies, I can't finish my job if I don't know what it is. And he starts laughing. Genuine laughter, and sounds like himself again. And Shera, and when we jump back into her POV, she's just like, I am so fucking irritated. He broke Lucan's legs. He tried to kill Meia, and now he's laughing and acting like this is all such a fun game. You know what, man? Fuck you. And I like that it's specifically mentioned that Shera doesn't get angry often. And that makes sense because oftentimes anger has to be born out of a sense of either pride and that being injured, some sort of ego, which Shera, despite being excellent at her job, she doesn't have a lot of ego to her. She's sort of interesting that way. Or it has to be on behalf of someone because you're sensing an injustice. Behalf of yourself or behalf of a friend that you care about. So it makes sense that since she struggles with empathy, maybe anger doesn't come as easily either. But obviously it's going to come with Lucan, who she's, he's one of the few people she actually cares about. So the Emperor asks Meia for this canister that has a healing medicine in it, and he gives that to Lucan, and it automatically fixes his broken legs in a way that sounds fucking horrifying. And the Emperor asks, when did you realize? And Shera says, you fought like everyone else. She'd seen the Emperor jump from 100 feet up in the air and land safely, catch a falling girl in his sleeve, awaken a sea of gravel, and dissolve a teacup with nothing but his will. Yet when he fought her, he relied entirely on the power of his invested blades. And he nods, and we can hear Nkothi shouting in the background, but it's not being echoed by him anymore. He yells back, take your whispers back to the dead. But Shera notices that his hands are shaking. Were you faking then? Meia asked. We thought... He turned a smile on her. Nkothi has no hold on me yet. It was a lie. Something had laid its hand on him at the beginning. Maybe he had allowed it for whatever reason. But for a moment there, he had changed into a different person. And I like that she's just not willing to just accept, which I don't know if Meia just accepts it. We're not in her POV here. I'm going to assume Meia accepts it because she's just uncomfortable with people in authority not having the mission at heart. She wants authority figures to be infallible. So the Emperor, the authority figure, is going to have to be the most infallible. Therefore, I am going to assume that Meia accepts this explanation without question and is like, okay, this is all some big test. But Shera, no. And I have to assume that Lucan especially is like, yeah, oh, yeah, it was just a fake. No, I saw it, sir. I saw it. I seen it. And I'm really curious if they ever have a conversation about this after, because I'm not entirely sure how free they are to talk with one another about what happens here. It's all meant to be very secret. And even though we do see that Shera tells Carrion some things later, I don't know how much they can talk to one another and be sure nobody's listening. Lucan, we had seen that he was able to invest the walls with like a sound dampening spell eventually, but I don't know if he has that ability here or if he had done that. I don't know what their living situation is even like at the palace. Do they compare notes? And Meia's like, well, he said it wasn't happening. And then Lucan's like, sweetie, he's full of shit. It was definitely happening. I'm a reader. I seen it. Like, yeah, it was. Because I can't tell if Meia would believe him or not. I really didn't give Meia the credit of thinking she knew how corrupt her mother was, but she did. She saw through Yala's shit and put her in fucking jail. And I really wasn't sure that she was going to be up for that. So I am constantly underestimating her. And I have to wonder, is she able now to see that her mother's corrupt because she misjudged the emperor and wanted to believe something and she's learned her lesson from that mistake? Or was she good at seeing through this shit from the start, And I think that probably what's going on with her mom is a result of her having fucked up and believed some things that she maybe shouldn't have and realizing that, like, people are people. We'll see. So this is when he says, that was the bargain I made 1,000 years ago. While the dead mother sleeps, I can use her power freely, but death will not hold her forever. When she begins to rise, her authority over me will be greater than mine over her. She will control me and I will need to be stopped. And this is when he asks about allowing Lucan into the gardeners. His disposition is clearly unsuitable. So why did they raise him with you? I needed a reader that fit several criteria, including age. His disposition as a killer was not one of those criteria. I didn't need him to be ruthless. I need you to be ruthless. I need you to be strong, and I need him to be skilled. Today was a practice round. But in case I fail, I will not let the elders win. You have one task. When Nkothi rises, you'll kill me. I don't think I've talked about this yet, but I do want to say, and this is something that I feel like I want Will to get more credit for in general. And yet at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to be handing out prizes for doing something that really should be standard. But nevertheless, I'm going to give him this credit. I don't know how many of y'all have noticed a lot in fiction, and especially fantasy, where people have certain powers and abilities. But oftentimes, male characters will be the ones with the incisive decision-making, physical prowess, ruthlessness, or even bloodthirstiness. And female characters will be the ones with subtler abilities, mind control, or any number of like shape-shifting, or, like the kinds of powers that are, while incredibly useful, not aggressive. And they are good fighters, like when it comes down to it, but they aren't the kind of person that inspires fear because their abilities are not seen as a threat the same way. And I didn't really think about it until like last week, but Lucan being the one guy in this trio is first of all unusual in and of itself. Women know if there's a group of people who are meant to be dangerous, if there's one character of a different sex, it's almost always one woman and 5 men. 1 woman and 2 men. 1 woman and 7 men. It's just a thing. It's fucking infuriating. And this means that that 1 woman character doesn't get to be fleshed out very much because she has to represent all women because there's only one of her. Whereas every man on the team gets to be a full and complete character of their own because men are seen as individuals, whereas women are seen as a collective, a monolith. And it's just tiring and foolish and short-sighted and honestly kind of a baffling choice to make as a writer when you're interested in stretching yourself. It just betrays a lack of interest in making women people. And it's so lovely to have this group be 2 women and 1 guy, and the guy is the one that is sensitive, like sensitive in every sense of the word. He has more empathy. He questions more. He is sensitive to atmosphere and the history of objects. Everything about him is sensitive. And the women are the ones that are killers. They are the ones that people are like, ooh, watch out, you know? And I just don't think that a lot of men realize, because they're so used to seeing themselves represented, what it's like for a woman to read a story like this, and how sort of disorienting it can be sometimes when I'm used to a woman being in the situation that Lucan is. A woman being the love interest of the main character. A woman who kind of needs to be rescued and has this subtle power, and she's like able to get out of her jail, but she's still at risk. She's still being held captive, is still in danger in some way. That's the woman's role almost always. And it's just really remarkable how used to it you get, even as a woman who is irritated by it, that I will still not notice how, like, completely tired that trope is, unless something has been written particularly badly, you know? I'm covering Mistborn right now. Great series. Brando Sando is an excellent writer, but the man cannot write women. He has one fascinating main female character in a crew of like 20 men. And every other woman has just been this like fluffy love interest, nothing. And it's so frustrating because I love the book otherwise, but holy shit, you know? And thank you, Will White. I don't know if this is like a conscious thing you're doing where you're considering, okay, the trope is this is how it would be set up, so I'm going to straight up invert it. But whether that's what you're doing or not, it's just so appreciated. And I say that with a total awareness that I have come to the last fucking section of this book before really putting a name to it. So again, that's how much I accept the other, that when like it doesn't even occur to me to stop and be like, oh, that's why things have felt a little bit different. It genuinely has felt a little off kilter to me as I was reading, and I couldn't tell why. And that's why. It's the genders being swapped. That's all it is. And that makes it feel so fresh and different. That's all he had to do. And it's like a complete change. It's like simultaneously fascinating to me that something that insignificant in the grand scheme could be changed and have that great an effect on the reader. And also kind of depressing that it's something I take so for granted that it would be the other way. That it would make that kind of difference to my experience, you know? But I just wanted to mention that because I just really, it wasn't until he had like summed this up here that it was really in my face, and I was suddenly like, oh God, that's the role that some other person, that a woman would play for some other male main character as a foil for them. And it's oftentimes too, the man being like cold-hearted and having to be taught to be better and kinder by a woman. I mean, that's often the thing. Women are meant to be the gentling influence, you know? We're meant to make men better instead of just being ourselves, and the man is responsible for what he fucking does. And here we have a direct inversion of Lucan trying to be like, bitch, can you not? Like, those are people. And I really like it. It's really nice, you know? Anyway, I just wanted to say that. So thanks, Will. And then we get a great opening for chapter 25. Do soulbound vessels have their own consciousness? My sword says yes, but it's a liar. All right, Joran. I'm looking forward to meeting this guy. So we come back to the present day, and the handmaiden has pulled the roof off. Reminder. And this whole bit here is wild. So first, Lucan tells Shera what the blade's name is, Cyphrin. And she's like, I don't know if I like that. That sounds like an elder name. And he's like, well, it killed a heart of Nakothi, so that makes sense. And he is like, and I think you're going to be able to use it to kill that handmaiden because Cyphrin feeds on its attempts to protect itself. I'll walk up and stab it then. The handmaiden's tentacles writhed, each big enough to tear a shark to pieces. Yikes. So, this is the beginning of their attacks. They're thinking about, first of all, where is the heart? Lucan tries to sense it. He is obviously in pain because he still has reader burn. And he kind of retracts back quickly and is like, I don't even sense it. I think it's gone. I don't know if somebody like took it or if somebody destroyed it, but something happened because I don't feel it anywhere on this island, which is very interesting to me. Calder Martin, when he comes and talks to them later, seems pretty certain that shit's still like intact. And I don't love it because it feels like he knows something we don't. And he was very eager to keep this away from the consultants, which I think Calder has some information on what the consultants were going to fucking do with it and wanted to keep it away from them as much as he wanted it for whatever he was going to do. I don't know though. Calder, I have a feeling we're going to go into the next book that it'll be his POV and it's all going to look real different. And I'm extremely excited about it. So let's see. Urziah Woodsman's chest stopped moving and Calder rose from his side. And I was like, in that moment, genuinely like, oh man, like I don't want Urziah to keep fighting Meia and bashing her into pieces, but I kind of liked the guy, you know, he had a vibe and I'm just a bit bummed that he had to be killed. It sucks. It seems we have a common enemy, he said. He pointed his orange awakened blade at her green one. Can you kill it? Why was he asking her? If he could destroy the heart, surely he had the power to deal with a lesser elder. But she had received her knife only minutes ago, and she was already learning the nature of its power. If he had carried his sword for longer, then he should know its limitations, and he was a reader as well. Maybe he knew he couldn't fight the handmaiden. So she kind of turns and looks at Lucan like, can I? And he says, if we can get you close enough. And it's clear when he says it, he doesn't think they're going to be able to do that. Calder rubbed his right arm with his left. Now that she looked closely, there was a red mark visible through the tears in his sleeve. It looked like some sort of brand or an angry bruise left from a monster gripping his arm too hard. I'm wondering, because she thinks that that's from like one of Nakothi's children. I'm wondering if that's from like that baby elder spawn itself doing something. I don't know. And he says it's planning on attacking soon, which Shera accepted as a product of his reader's senses. Is it? Or is it a product of that mark you just saw on his arm? He's touching it as he says it. That feels connected. When it does, I'll hit it as hard as I can. You'll have to find your own opening. And she's just like, oh, is that all? Okay, cool. And she asks, what are the odds it'll stay dead? And he's like, none. That's not happening. And she's like, God damn it. I knew that, but I just didn't want you to tell me that. So there's this moment that I find really interesting. She looks at Meia and says, maybe if I get wounded, they'll give me some time off. Meia, stab me in the back. Meia opened her mouth to try and respond, but muscles shifted unnaturally under her skin, and the blue-scaled flesh around her wound crawled. She shut her mouth, giving up. Every time Shera grew jealous of Meia's enhanced power, she only had to remind herself of the drawbacks. Lucan patted Shera on the shoulder. Don't worry, I'm sure she would stab you if she could. Something about that statement seemed to make Calder angry. His fist tightened on his sword as though he meant to use it, and his face turned red. Just do your part, he said roughly, and marched away. What's up with that? Is that Is it just that he doesn't like seeing the camaraderie amongst them? Is it like what did he get so sore over that? I found that very like surprising, his reaction there. I don't know. So this is when Calder begins to yell using the elder spawn that is screaming. And at first everybody's like, what is he fucking doing? And then it turns out he is instructing his ship from the shore to fire with the cannons. And Shera is like, wow, all right, that's dope, actually. And as she heads out with her blade to cut through children, that shit is wildly effective. It's the kind of effective that makes everybody uncomfortable. The Whispering Death reveled in its role. A nick of the green transparent blade stole all of Nikothi's power away from one of her children, reverting it to an inanimate pile of body parts. Like, reminder, guys, these things were indestructible unless you basically like took their heads off. And even then, they were not easy foes. They were like zombies, you know? And now just a nick and it's just like just falls into a pile. With each enemy she struck down, she got a little stronger, a little faster. She vaulted over something like a wingless crawling wasp, slashing it as she flew. It died and another green ghost was born. A blue-skinned imp rushed at her, screaming, and she did something on pure instinct she'd never imagined. She reached out with her mind and tore its power away. An emerald wisp of light was ripped from its body, though Shera hadn't come near it with her blade. As an experiment, she stopped, listening to Siphon's whispers. They didn't cohere into words, but she drew some meaning. A second later, she drew in her intent as though taking a deep breath. A wave of green light, like an ocean's tide, surged out of the surrounding elder spawn and into her. For a moment, she was blinded by a verdant flash, as though she'd stared directly into an emerald sun. For 50 yards around her, all the children collapsed. Yo. Dope. Oh my god, you guys, I just realized something. The elders were forced into sleep, and Shera's always sleepy. There's something there! I cracked it! Something's going on! Oh, what does it mean? Oh, God, I just realized. I don't know how I missed that this whole time. Shit. All right. Anyway, moving on. So, all the children collapse, and she gets this surge of pure power. And I love this. She glanced down at herself for a moment to make sure she wasn't glowing. That's the kind of fucking, like, height of this. And she is about to head out, and she realizes she doesn't hear Lucan and Meia, and she turns, like, ready to attack whatever's hurting them, and then realizes they're just literally standing staring at her, like, what did you just fucking do? She is just like, oh, wow, that was cool. Am I glowing? Nope, seems good. Let's go. She just, like, takes it in stride in a way that is just, you are not honoring the depth of what just happened, Shera. And this is when Lucan says, awakening a weapon doesn't give powers to you unless you're a soulbound. Meia's left eye twitched, and she looked like she was holding herself back from screaming in frustration. Oh, Meia. You'll be soulbound someday. Who knows? Who knows? Something can happen. So, this is, and he says, what a soulbound can do depends on their vessel. Most of them aren't any stronger than anyone else. And basically, Shera is like, dude, can we talk about this later? We have shit to do right now. And he's like, this is really important. We need to, and then realizes, no, she's moved on without me. Behind her, Meia grumbled. She leapt up the ladder, landing with her feet on the 5th rung. That's the thing that makes Meia grumble. Yeah, Meia, look. I get it, girl. I really do. I feel for you. So then we get this really amazing, like, possession sort of thing that starts to happen. Shera climbs up toward the handmaiden. And it's wild. Earlier, Lucan says he can sense that the handmaiden is afraid. And she lets out a scream that has all of the children charging at the three of them. And Shera ran straight toward the onrushing wave. The first rank died, collapsing in a whirling storm of green wisps. But the second rank was right behind, hitting Meia with slashing claws, ripping tails, and gnashing mandibles. I love that. Mandibles. I love the word mandible. Shera couldn't react in time, stunned as she was by the strength that rushed into her from the dead elder spawn. The children of Nakothi met Meia instead. So Meia, she's super capable. She's on top of it. It's not like she can't handle herself. But Shera kind of just leaves her to it. And it's very clear to us as readers pretty quickly that she is being influenced in a way that we know Shera wouldn't just leave her friends to figure it out. As much as the mission is to get to the handmaiden, and granted, like, Shea does prioritize her missions, she still wouldn't just leave them completely behind. And Lucan is calling out to her for help, and calling out to her probably also out of concern, and she's just straight up ignoring him. So Meia is clearing the way for her, so she thinks. But then it's clear Meia's getting in her way. And Shera doesn't even stop. She's just like, well, I guess I better fucking go through her then. And it takes some, basically an intervention from Lucan to stop her. He puts his hand on her shoulder and is like, you need to put your blades down. And her whole body is like, what? Why? No, I have to kill that. Why would I do that? I need the blade to do it. Do you not get that? It's just like, for her, simple, 1 + 1. And he says, I'll teach you how to kill the handmaiden. Teach her? It was simple. All she had to do was kill Meia, kill any children that got in her way, and then kill the handmaiden. 3-step process. And I love that the blade itself recognizes Lucan, because he awakened it. So it's like, all right. I mean, if he says, then maybe that is something we should listen to. And it sort of releases her just enough that she's able to put it in its sheath. And as soon as she does that, she's like, whoa, oh God, I was going to kill her. What? And Lucan tackles her out of the way just as the handmaiden, comes at her. I think the handmaiden, as soon as she puts the blade out, is like, all right, here we go. Because I think it was genuinely afraid of Cyphrin. The elder reached down and tore up another pair of trees, readying them to throw. Children skittered closer to Shera. The two of them ran next to Meia. We need a plan, Shera yelled. Meia gestured to the handmaiden. Kill it! Do what you've been doing to the others. Won't work, Shera said briefly. That would be like trying to inhale a tornado. I have to stab it. If the blade penetrated the handmaiden's flesh, it would turn Nakothi's power against her servant, and the handmaiden would effectively destroy itself. And I think it's really interesting that she, knows that would work. But Meia doesn't ask for an explanation. Meia is just like, I'm going to throw you. I fucking love this. Shera looked up the 60 feet to the top of the handmaiden's neck. I'll die. I will definitely die. Meia threw her. They make such a good team, you guys. I love them so much. So, she chucks her. A tentacle grabs her out of the air. She survives the impact, which she doesn't expect to do. And then it says, hands sprouting out of the elder's flesh grasped fistfuls of her clothes and every inch of her body. Ew! Oh, God. I hate it. And Cyphrin cackling with glee, stabbed into the meat of the handmaiden's limb. Green light crawled out like moss, spreading over a boulder, and the elder shrieked loud enough that the sound tore at Shera's ear. And then Shera was falling again. And she is full of power, because she has inhaled basically everything that was lost by the handmaiden. She was falling toward the handmaiden's other tentacles, and most of them were easily the size of thick tree branches. With enhanced reflexes, Shera landed on her feet, dashing down a tentacle as though running on a narrow bridge. Does this sound cinematic or what? I want to see it. I want to see it. And the handmaiden doubles over, sticking her face in Shera's own. And I love this moment because she is trying to, like, as Siphon says, just distract them. And Siphon whispers, "We are your death." Like, bitch, are you desperate? And it's not gonna work. And Shera's thoughts grew cold. She was here to kill this thing. That was it. That was all she needed to know. There was nothing left to think about. Shera plunged her awakened blade straight into the handmaiden's face. Ha! Sucks to suck! She's like, "I'm going to get my face right up against yours and turn you mad." And Shera's like, "Or I could use your face as the most obvious target that is inches away from me." Dodoy, you idiot. I love Shera. I love them all. They're all great. A shriek obliterated thought. Siphon laughed like a madman, and the dead mother screamed from somewhere out on the Ion. An emerald light swallowed Shera's vision. And she's falling, and Meia catches her. And I love this moment. Meia's carrying her, and Shera's like, "Man, I'm like so jazzed. I could go for a fucking sprint right now. Like, why is she carrying me?" And Lucan takes the knife out of her hand and puts it into her sheath and says, "Get some sleep." And she immediately falls asleep. So I'm wondering, does it store that energy? Like, if she's super tired later, but she still has a mission to finish, can she just grip that blade and then whoosh, be like caffeinated? Is that how that works? I am very interested. So chapter 26 starts with, when a world dies, it starts to decay. It breaks into fragments, and these fragments float on an empty sea. They will fade forever until they latch onto a healthy inhabited world, or until there's nothing left. Living inhabitants can sometimes survive the death of their world. They're often twisted, grotesque, and powerful beings, forever altered by their exile to the void. Something very much like your elders, in fact. The unknown wanderer from observations of the unknown wanderer. Unknown wanderer, eh? Would that be anybody that we might know, perhaps? Just wondering. So we go back to present day. And this was very unexpected. Everybody goes in their different directions. So Meia heads down to the prison because she's like, everybody else seems to have just forgotten Calder Martin, but he's still fucking out here, and he's the reason shit has gone the way it went. So I'm gonna get this motherfucker. And when she gets down there, his wife, who she was originally looking for in the cell, that cell is like completely filled with collapsed debris. And obviously, if she was still in there, she's dead. That means if she was still in there, though. We don't know that. Lucan got out. She might have too. And Calder is trying to read the area to see if there's any sense of her. And she sort of interrupts him with her attack, but she is not in great shape. And when she tries to attack him, he like looks at her, and it says horror and pity mixed on his face. He looked as though he was about to rush her to a surgeon, not attack. And then he says, "You should have checked behind you," which she thinks is just a feint. A sound behind her caught her attention, like a snapping flag or flapping wings, and a voice like Othagor himself bellowed out, "Behind you!" which I am assuming that was his elder spawn, just flapping around. She spun, bringing both shears to bear. A pain and white light flared in her skull. Meia struggled weakly, but the blow and exhaustion took their toll. Her consciousness faded to black. Her last thought, I can't tell Shera about this. Ah, I love her. So then we go to Shera. She's in the infirmary. And she has been, it says she, over the last 2 weeks, she'd spent more time in the Grey Island Infirmary than in the 10 years prior. She'd have to be more careful. Well, considering she was heading straight back to a desk job in the capital, she effectively had no choice but to be careful. What? How does she, is that like assignment due to her injury or why? Or is she just being reassigned permanently? She's not being reassigned permanently, right? I have to assume that's a temporary situation. So she goes and gets her gear and gets some lunch and goes and visits Lucan. And I love the like clashing that always follows with Hansen, because he's the guard and he's just like, I don't want to deal with her. But he lets her in to talk to, and you know, he does these things here and there where he's like, you shouldn't do that. You're not allowed to do that. You can't give him that. And they just completely ignore him, which does not get old. And she sort of like, kind of like pokes at him, Lucan, that is, over the fact that he like went back to prison voluntarily. And he's like, babe, you remember that I was never in because I couldn't get out. This is where I'm meant to be, which I find very interesting because there's still a whole lot to that story that we don't know. So they talk about the weapon and how its wrapping is not going to be convenient and how she'll need to change it every few days, but that Joran Cursebreaker is coming and he may be able to come up with something that will last longer and be better for wrapping this blade. And she, like, there's a part of her that's kind of frustrated at this incredibly powerful weapon and not being able to use it, but she can easily remember that she nearly killed her close friend. Like, there's no question, and she thanks him for that. And then she gets summoned to a High Council meeting. And this is where she meets the actual client, which it had not occurred to me that they had a client. For some reason, I assumed that this was all Yala trying to do something wild in order to, like, establish a grasp on the market in some way using the heart of Nikothi, because she doesn't care about the Empire anymore, you know? So when Yala asks her what Empire, you know, about their oath, Shera says, the Emperor would tell us the Empire is made of people. That's who we serve, not him. Well said, Carrion responded, and we agree. But we doubt that raising another Emperor is the best way to serve the Imperial citizens. And Shera suddenly realizes that's why Carrion and Yala have been working together, albeit, you know, with tension, because they both don't think an Emperor is the answer. And I think it's interesting because, like, Shera isn't even necessarily that angry or betrayed, because she wasn't super committed to the idea of a new Emperor. But she doesn't like not knowing things. That's really the issue for me here, is the fact that this has been an alliance she wasn't aware of, and she sort of thought her and Carrion were united against Yala, and finding out that that isn't actually how it was probably throws her off a little, you know? And so this is the they talk about the regents here and how Nikothi wants there to be one weak spot for all of humanity, but the regents, like, that really does feel like the way to go, having more people so that there are like the weak spots, whatever they may be, are more spread out and are not the only entry points. That seems like a smart idea. So this is when everybody else comes in. First, we have Tyrell. He looked nothing like a farmer this time, like a different man, like a successful banker instead of a vagabond, and he was not alone. So here comes Nathaniel Barrius, and he is extremely businesslike, and very like, what's the word I want? Gregarious. You know, he's weirdly disarming and to the point. And he says, "My only hunger is for the meat of commerce, my only thirst for the cooling sip of a deal newly struck. And then, but if I could get a fruit tea, that would be great." I don't know, I like this guy. I don't trust him at all, but I like him. So he asks what happened to the heart and Nibirius Claiborne, although he does not seem to actually care about Nibirius. And Carrion says, "It didn't leave. We conclude it must have been destroyed." And Barrius is like, "Oh, cool. Well, that's all I need to know. If it's gone, it's gone." Which I thought was interesting. I would have expected, if I were being told about this from an outside, the storyline, I would be like, "Oh, okay, this guy wants the heart," right? It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like he cares about it, really. And I find it wild that everybody's just like, "I guess somebody destroyed it." I mean, of course we're going to keep looking for it. Yes. But I wouldn't assume that at all. I would just assume somebody managed to escape with it, somehow. This Nibirius Claiborne was recovered by the navigator, Captain Calder Martin. We assume the captain will take him back to his sponsors as soon as possible. Barrius says, "Not a problem. He was irrelevant. I just wanted to know. We've made progress, but not as much as I'd like. You'll be paid immediately." And this is when Shera, she's like, "I have a question." He's like, "Ask me a question. Ask me any question. There's no good to the world if people don't feel free to ask questions." And I'm like, calm down, okay? Let her talk. And she asks, "How much are we making?" And I love this so much. If we're going to war with 2 guilds, it had better be worth it. 2, Furman, the bag. A second later, his servant, Furman, placed a velvet bag into the alchemist's open palm. Barrius upended it, spilling 4 silver coins onto the table. "My alchemists are accepted absolutely everywhere. As a result, I'm able to get a fairly accurate sense of the workings in most guilds. Based on my own information and what you all have brought me, this is what I've been able to piece together. Cheska Bennett isn't entirely unreasonable, but for now she's against us. She has invested too much in a second emperor to back out now. The Watchmen, we believe, are set on producing a series of disposable emperors. When one is corrupted, they will replace him." He lined the 2 other coins up, with the first 2 forming a line. This pair bore the open book of the Magister's Guild and the Aurelian shield of the Imperial Guard. The Guard have no reason to exist without the Emperor. Will they join us? Absolutely not. They're a relic of the past. The Magisters, to be quite frank, I don't know why the Magisters want an Emperor at all. Maxius has always been an enigma to me. These represent the guilds most committed to returning an emperor to the empty throne. Those who hold on to the archaic notion of one global empire. His eyeglasses gleamed. I would call them the enemy. So yeah. And then these are who stand for progress beyond the empire. These coins were gold, and he lined them up quickly. White Sun of Luminian, Emerald of Green Wardens, Bottled Flame of Kenatalia, and the Gardening Shears of the Consultants. And 3 days gone, I received confirmation the Green Wardens will no longer allow enemy guild members into their territories, and the Luminian Order has begun reinforcing their borders. My friends, we have gone beyond threatening 2 guilds. Our course is well and truly set. This will be a full-scale guild war, the likes of which the Empire has never seen. I, for one, can't wait. You fucking weirdo. And Shera, in true beautiful form, that sounds like a lot of work. And he's like, legit, yeah. And I don't really want it, but there isn't another way to do this. And we kind of were headed this direction ever since the Emperor died. And she can't help but sort of take that personally because she killed the Emperor, like clearly. But it feels like a jab at her. I think she killed the Emperor. We don't know that for sure, but I think she did. We'll see. And it ends with, let's see, from what I gathered, you're very important to the future of this guild. And I love when he says, how does it feel to have killed one of Nikothi's handmaidens? And then he stops and is like, never mind. I invited you because I need to know. Can I count on your support? And she just says, ask me in the morning, and leaves. Gotta respect it. I really do. So then we go to chapter 27. And I should mention, when Shera first walked into the guild room, the Yala immediately asked her, where her daughter is. And I was like, what? And it turns out that she's been fucking captured. And I love how this goes. But we'll get there. First we have the moment where Shera goes back to her room to sleep and Carrion is waiting for her. And they have a conversation here. This is 10 years ago. And this is right after the whole, test, allegedly. And Carrion is asking for some of what happened. And basically, Shera doesn't want to give her too many details because it's meant to be secret. But she does tell her in the end that the Emperor knows he's being corrupted. And he is putting us in place to kill him, if that is to happen. And Carrion seems to just be like, if that is what he thinks needs to happen, she respects that. So, does not object to it. I don't get a vibe from her that she's going to go around telling people about this, And she also gives her a sheaf of paper bound in strings, removed from the miners' archives with the blessing of the council. The watchman and his crew were headed to that island to harvest a heart in hopes of attaining eternal life. I'm sure the Emperor told you that much. What he didn't tell you was why. It pertains to a group of men and women who call themselves the Sleepless. Their goals and methods, that which sleeps will soon wake. It's their motto. According to them, the great elders are not dead. They're merely sleeping and will rise to reclaim the world that was once theirs. And that stops Sharon. She's like, fuck, do you think that's true? And Carrion just says, probably. So, then we go to Meia, waking up, tied up on this ship. I love this dude. Morning, princess, he said. We're real... He didn't get another word before she butted him in the lip with her forehead, then shifted her hands. She had to grit her teeth against the pain. Her fingers felt as though she'd crushed them in a vice, and they made an unhealthy crackling noise, but they slipped straight through the ropes. A second later, when her hands had returned to normal, she pulled a stretch of rope apart with her bare hands. Another man, a heartlender in a white suit and hat, raised a pistol. She bunched the muscles in her legs, leaping up to the stern deck, landing inches in front of him, holding his pistol in a firm grip. He seemed to remember her, his eyes widening. How did Calder capture you? And she realizes that back on Nikothi's island, she had run into some trouble locating Shera. Shortly before her fight with Urziah, she'd rescued a few watchmen from the children of Nikothi. At least, she'd assumed they were watchmen. So this is pretty interesting that she had actually saved these guys. And so there's a combination of them being impressed with just her sheer power. But also, they kind of owe her a little bit, And she lets go of the gun and he holsters it immediately. So I feel like he's aware. Yeah, I do kind of owe you. She asks how long she was unconscious. And he says a day or so. And then... I'll be heading back to the Grey Island. And he's like, we're heading to the capital. And she's like, I said what I said. And then we find out there was a ransom note left for her. And we go to Shera. I love this. She doesn't even finish reading it. She gets to, if you want her back, you must and she just crumples it up. The scout looked at her nervously. Well, will we negotiate? Shera hadn't caught up on her rest. She yawned. Negotiate? They let Meia onto their ship. She glanced out to sea. They're already dead. End of book. That's good shit, guys. I'm glowing. I loved it. It was so good. I can't wait to start the next one. I'm so excited. All right. I have to wrap up. I'm so over time, but it was worth it. I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. Thank you again to George. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.